Welcome back, everyone, to the Rebel Crow Psychic Show with your host, Athena Silver. We're having an awesome guest on tonight. We are talking to the one and the only Stephanie Woodfield about her new book. So stay with us, and we'll be right back. Let's get into it. Tonight we're going to be talking to Stephanie Woodfield about her latest book. She wrote Dedicant, Devotee, Priest, a pagan guide to divine relationships. This book has been like one of those books where you see yourself in it. You realize that it's one of these books you can apply to your craft in whichever craft you practice. This book has been one of those like cross-cultural books that you get from time to time that really has more answers than you would even anticipate. So join me with welcoming Stephanie on. Thank you so much for coming on Rebel Crow and speaking with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Stephanie. How would you define your craft? How do you see yourself within the craft?
Well, I've been a practicing pagan for a little over 20 years. And my practice started mostly with learning magic, and then it really became very deity focused very quickly. So I consider myself a devotional polytheist. My focus really is connecting with deity. Magic is one of those things in my toolbox, but my real focus is connecting to deity and that personal development and helping others as well as a priestess connect with deity. I also am an organizer of a couple of events, including Pagans in the Park in Orlando and the Morgan's Call Retreat in Connecticut, which is actually a weekend all about devotion, specifically to the Morgan.
Very nice.
And yeah, that's mostly me.
Well, that is a good intro to your work, especially. I've noticed that throughout your book and even on your website, you bring up the Morgan, you bring up Irish deities and all of that pantheon, which some of us are familiar with some of the Celtic lore and the Celtic deities, but not all of us are. So how long have you been a priestess to the Morgan?
Specifically to the Morgan, it has been 20 years. If you couldn't tell yet, I became a witch when I was in my early teens, and it kind of went from there. But the Morgan always was the one that showed up the most for me. She was a deity that I didn't go out looking for her. Mm-hmm. I actually didn't even know her name. I was very aware of Arthurian legends and Morgan Le Fay, which is a completely different character. But I had been part of a Celtic coven at the times. And really what the group was about was you had to pick a patron deity. Mm-hmm. So I got into that point in the group where, okay, it's this time to pick a patron. And I had this whole spiel where I said, you know what, I'm going to work with all the goddesses. I don't have to pick one. You know, the baby witch phase where think you know everything. You're like, oh, it's going to be fine. So after saying that to the group, I went home. And that night I had a dream where I saw this woman, and she was kind of scary looking, but she kind of drew me to her. And she kept turning into birds, into crows. And I asked her, who are you? And she said, the Morgan. And I have no idea.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of led me down the road of studying Irish mythology and learning who she was, that she was a goddess of sovereignty, of battle, connected to magic, prophecy. She's connected to quite a lot of things. But she just kind of showed up in my life and kind of took over. Which is basically what the Morgan does.
I completely understand. I have deities that have showed up that way as well. It's like, they're like, we're here, the party just started. And, you're playing catch up, trying to fumble and like, who is this? What do I do? What I loved about your book is how you spun mythology, lore, your own personal practices, and how you see things through your lens, and your perspective. It was really interesting to see how, like, you do it as a solo practitioner and as someone who is also a priestess in your own right. It's nice to see, where you started and how you progressed through the different levels to get to the priesthood that you're in.
It's definitely not something that happens all at once. Absolutely. Like, I think the gods, we go through different initiations with them. There's definitely different challenges when you serve them.
Mm-hmm.
So being a priest or a priestess, that's something that is always going to evolve, both in your relationship to deity and also in your relationship to the community and how you're serving the community. And that also changes depending on what deity that you have that devotion to. Because, a priestess of the Morgan is going to be very different than a priestess of Bridget or Bast or Sekhmet. They're all going to have different work for you in the world. So, they can be quite different depending on who you're serving.
Absolutely. And I think that the priesthood and some of like the assigned routine and tasks that you have to take care of and oversee, I think changes depending on who it is that you're serving. You may serve, for instance, La Santa Muerte, and it may be more of a solo practice where you are a priestess in some right, but it's more of being a priestess of your own sphere, as opposed to, say, holding open rituals for like Athena or Freya, whereas that is more community based. There's more people that are familiar with those deities and are more open to like communal practice.
Oh, absolutely. It could be in service to particular spirits, whether that's the ancestors, the She or the fairy folk. Who you're in service to definitely isn't always the community.
Absolutely. Which is why I loved your book. You really touched all the bases. So I wanted to ask you, what advice would you have for a dedicant, for someone who is just opening up and finding their way, looking for their community and their deity? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think if you want to really build a deep connection to deity, there's a lot of different things that you should do. But I think the base line of it is to learn more about that deity. Mm-hmm. Like, read the lore, find out as much as you possibly can. And, it doesn't mean that everything that you read is going to be correct, but be open to it. Read everyone's opinions and really try to learn as much as possible about that deity. Because a lot of times you are going to get different things from that deity, whether it's an image in a journey work or something you see in a dream or something you feel that they have told you. And it's going to be a confirmation. That happened a lot with me in the Morgan. When I was learning the mythology, I would kind of be like, okay, I really feel she has a connection to this, or she's showing me this. And the more I learned about her, then I'm like, oh, well, that's in the lore. So that makes sense. So I think that's really where you have to start. Then after that, I would say your devotional practices. And that's something that's really hard for people because I can kind of outline what some good practices are, but you have to take it to the next level.
Absolutely.
Creating an altar doesn't make the deity show up. I kind of remember that when I started out in this. I don't remember what book I read, but it said, make an altar, which a lot of books suggest. So I made my altar. I lit the candles. I lit the incense. Mm-hmm. And then I just kind of waited. I'm like, okay, what do I do now?
Now what? Yeah. Now I know exactly how you feel. I tell people the altar is the liminal space. That's your portal. Just because you have a portal doesn't mean that it's all tuned properly. And it means that you have to keep coming back to that portal in order to engage with it and to bring, through what you need to bring through. You're right when you say that it's hard for people to kind of grasp the daily routine of it. People think that, it has to be these, laying out candles and big feasts and feast days and all these things. But a lot of times it's the prayers you say when you're driving here, the flowers that you leave out, just because, it's the little things on a day-to-day that I think brings true spirituality into, the deity practice.
Right. And that's making it part of your life. It's not just something that you do in front of an altar. It's something that, like you said, you could do in the car. I've definitely done that. Most of the spiritual work I do, honestly, is not in front of an altar. It's out in my life, which is when you need it the most, honestly. Sometimes it's even at work when you have a hard day. It's like, okay, I need to, ground and center and call on deity and, just make this day a little bit better or bearable.
Absolutely. Get through how you can get through. But I noticed that, objectively, just kind of watching people throughout, my life, you notice that people, they gain that daily practice at a certain point, in their spiritual journey. They're ready. They see it. They've been, around the bush a couple of times and seen other people progress through it. But it seems like they start to see like that spiritual aspect is missing at a certain point, and it's kind of like, to me, that's when I see like, oh, okay, you're awake now. Like you realize you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it,
Right. Well, I think too, you have to find a practice that you actually like. Yeah. I think we're very used to seeing like, okay, well, this book suggested I should do X, Y, Z, so I'm going to do it exactly like that. And a lot of devotional work, it's not like a spell where I can tell you mix A with B and say this, and then, do this particular thing, and then you have a result. You have to really find what is meaningful to you. For example, like myself, in general, if you look at my office and my studio where I make jewelry, everything's kind of chaotic. There's things everywhere, but I know exactly where they are. So I kind of embrace that chaos in the rest of my life. But when I do devotional work, I have to have it very uniform. I have to have a structure to it. So I have a particular thing that I say and do, and that works for me. Mm-hmm. My husband, on the other hand, his pencils need to be lined up and they have to be in the right place on his desk. He needs to have everything organized. And his devotional practices are very freeform. They're not the same every day. There's an intention behind it, but he's not doing the exact same thing or saying the exact same thing when he's doing his devotional work. So I think it really depends on the person. And if you are that person that does not like structure and needs something freeform, if you try to conform yourself and put yourself into that box where I'm going to say a lesser banishing ritual in front of my altar every single day, if you're not that type of person and that doesn't resonate with you, it's not going to work. You're going to do it for a few days and then you're going to stop doing it because it did.
I know we touched on it before, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about unverified personal gnosis.
UPG?
We all have that fill in the gap, capacity when we're working with spirits, when we're working with deities. But there are quite a few people nowadays that you see on some of these apps out there, and they're promoting their personal gnosis versus like scholarly work, scholarly study, years and millennia of people who are actually serving these deities, like within a formal religion and things like that. Can you speak a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Well, my idea on UPG or unverified personal gnosis is, for the most part, they're going to fall into two different categories. And the one that most of it is going to fall into is a personal message for yourself from deity. And the thing is, deity uses imagery a lot. They're not going to really just give you a message and it's all going to be words. Maybe there are some words, but deity speaks in the language of symbols. So if you have a dream, for example, I had someone who contacted me, and I have this story in the book too. He had contacted me about information connected to the Morrigan, and her being a deer goddess. I'm like, well, okay. There is no connection in the lore with the Morrigan and deer. She is not a deer goddess. Mm-hmm. It was the long and short of it, which I felt bad telling him. Then he told me that he had this vivid dream where he saw her walking along with a stag, and then he had turned into the stag. And I'm looking at his social media, and he has stags and deer imagery all over his pages. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not that she's a deer goddess, but she is telling you something with this imagery, and it seems to be an image that you feel connected to. and maybe you're represented by the stag.
Or it's a spirit, or it's a different spirit she's pointing him to.
Right. So, I can't tell you what that message was, because the message was given to you in the language of images that you will understand and will have meaning to you. So I think when we have these big experiences with deity, we want to be that person that's uncovered some kind of hidden knowledge, that there's really a underground deer cult of the Morgan from the ancient past or something, which I highly don't think that's going to be true, but never know. We want to be the ones that uncover that secret information when it's far more simple than that. It's deity telling us something and speaking directly to us with imagery. So I think a lot of times UPG is used as a tool for people to say, well, I know the one truth about this deity, and your truth is wrong and my truth is correct, when most of the time this UPG is really a message for you and just for you. And it doesn't have to be something that's shared. It's something for you to figure out. So that I think is the most common one. And then the second one would be an actual shared gnosis, where the deity is telling you something, to do something, or to make an offering to them. And then you find someone else who has been given the exact same message. For example,
and that happens. Yeah, it happens sometimes,
I know 3 different people who do not know each other who told me Hecate had told them to be veiled while they were making offerings, and when they backed away from the altar, they literally backed up. They did not turn their back on the statue or the goddess figure that they had. And these people didn't know each other. And I'm like, okay, all right. So it sounds like you're all hearing the same thing from Hecate. So that happens too, where you do have people who are doing their practices solo, and then they come across someone else and they've received the same message.
Absolutely. And veiling was very sacred back in the day when her mystery cult was alive and bumping, in its infancy, so it's not a far off, piece of information. You know what I mean? Like, it's close enough where you're like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that could be very powerful. It's just, again, you have to be careful because, like you said, some of these messages are for you. And when you do try to open it up and let other people in, there's a lot of misconstruing. There's a lot of inconsistencies that come up. I noticed some of that in some of the Reconstruction religions, the mystery cults that have been, cut and pasted back together. And there's some, personal gnosis going on to kind of fill in the gaps. And it's beautiful, but it's not historic, Right. And I'm sure you know who I'm referring to.
I have some ideas there.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah. We have to be open to that. We have to be open to the idea that, I'm not a Bronze Age pagan. I'm a modern pagan, and I am doing a particular practice that has meaning to me. And maybe the deity has told me to practice a particular way, and that's fine. And if someone else practices a different way, that's okay too. I think we just have to be honest with gnosis as, this is my way that works for me. This is what I have been told. And if you've been given a different message and different marching orders, that's okay too. I think sometimes we're just afraid of being wrong. Yeah. If the Morgan tells me to do something one way and tells someone else to do something a different way, or Hecate or any other deity, that's okay.
What advice would you give to somebody who's getting into the devotional practice part of their, spiritual journey? Do you have any shining pieces of advice you'd like to give?
Well, I think go carefully, because when I went through devotional work with deity and becoming dedicated to them, which in my terminology would mean that you have some kind of formal oath or agreement with them of some kind, whether that's to be in service to them, to do a specific task for them, to, I don't know, you say every Thursday you're going to make an offering to Thor, whatever that happens to be. You have a promise, an obligation to uphold. You have to be careful about what you promise. It's not like making a New Year's resolution where, you know, if you do it, great. If you don't do it, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
When you make your promises to the gods, there are consequences. So we really have to think about when we make oaths to them, what we're offering them, and if we're really going to fulfill our obligations. Because if you don't, there are consequences. You know, things can go badly. That deity, you know, depending on what deity you're talking about, they can kind of throw your life upside down and make you observe that obligation. So I think there's a lot of rewards with your connection to deity, but think about what you're offering. Think about if it's reasonable. And if you make promises, you have to uphold them, whether that's an oath or a spiritual taboo or something like that. They're not just empty words.
I agree with you on that. They're not. And I feel like when making these oaths that you can benefit just as much as deity. Like, for example, I am about 4 years cigarette free. Now, I gave up cigarettes as an offering to one of these deities that I follow. And
that's a hard one.
And I have stuck to every damn day of those 4 years, begrudgingly. But they know I have the oath of, well, I won't smoke, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And I may bitch about it. And you got to let me have that. But it was beneficial, though, because I feel like, I got the health benefit. I got the benefit of the connection. Like, they hold me accountable, you know, as well as, you know, keeping me on the straight and narrow, which is part of their plan for you and part of their charge as protecting you and watching you. And I feel like they keep you honest, you know?
Right. And like, you expect them to keep their word if they're going to do something for you. So you have to do the same.
Absolutely. And it's not easy when you give up something big. But like when I had given that up, like, I was asking for something big, so I had to sacrifice something equally big. But it was something that I was trying to work towards, like gaining my health back. So, you know, I realized now down the road that it was an integral part of my spiritual journey, giving it up. You know, most people don't think, you know, cigarettes can be that, but it was, you know.
Oh, absolutely. That's a hard thing to give up. And that's a lot of energy too, because you're giving up that energy and putting that energy into upholding that oath. And, you know, that's part of that reciprocal energy that goes between you and deity. So
absolutely. Well, I'm allowed to use tobacco in spiritual ceremony. That was like, they told me like they're not giving that completely up because they said tobacco was very healing. I work in like with curanderismo, and it's Latin American shamanism and healing. It's a healing practice. So when I use like cigars to purify people and stuff like that, I don't consider that smoking, because it's the spiritual act of healing, because you have to blow it out and cleanse the auras and the energies and stuff like that. So I'm allowed to do that, but I'm not allowed to pleasure smoke.
Right. Well, that's actually another really good thing too. Like, when you make an oath, you have to consider those things. It's almost like making a wish with a genie. Like, you have to think about, you know, what are the consequences? Are there any circumstances where I'll need to do this thing and it will be permissible, like with the spiritual healing? And is there going to be that discussion with deity? I can do it for this reason, or I cannot do it at all.
How do you see it? Like, when do you typically think people are ready to really take that big leap to priesthood? Because that's a big leap.
It is a big leap, absolutely. And I can say that as a priestess to the Morgan, it very much began with my connection to her and being more of a solitary priestess. Mm-hmm. And then that evolved into doing work for the community. I don't know if you ever really know that you're ready, honestly. You really have to get that direction from deity. And I know that's probably a horrible answer, But a lot of times deity will push you towards that. And sometimes it's stuff that you're scared to do and is for your best interests. I'm a very introverted person. If the Morgan didn't push me to go do things or organize a yearly retreat in her honor where we're in the woods doing tons of rituals for 4 days, I don't know that I would do that.
No, so, I get it. You know, like it becomes a point where you're not really doing it for you.
No, you're not.
It becomes for other people.
And I think that's where you see the rewarding part. When you see that you've helped facilitate a meaningful experience for someone else where they can connect to deity and they can get an answer that they need. At our retreat, we also practice oracular work where we are channeling, and people can come up and ask questions in a private space as part of the event. And that's usually probably the most meaningful aspect of the event, to be able to speak to your gods.
And you're doing like the ancient ritual of connection, the ocular work and seership is some of the most ancient medicine we have. And to see it practiced modern day is beautiful, even though it is not the same as it was in Delphi, in the ancient world. We're still connecting to those deities in a very similar way. We might not be, underneath the temple anymore, but we can still
create our own temple.
Yeah.
But I think giving the gods a voice, and it is a very weird experience, because as far as what we do, I don't remember who I spoke to or what I said, because I'm just the vessel.
Yeah.
Whatever transpired when deity is channeling through is between that person and the deity. So it is an odd experience to be the vessel, but it is rewarding when someone comes up to you and says, first of all, I'm not going to remember what I said, but they'll be like, you said this, and like, okay, the gods said that. But it's rewarding when you see that someone got the message they needed, or the information they needed, or they had that moment of connection. And I think that's what, keeps you going. You see you are doing something meaningful, and your own relationship with deity will continue to evolve and become stronger as part of that. But I think as a priest, they're always going to push you. And that's not a bad thing, because I think sometimes we do have to be pushed out of our comfort zone, because it's for our best good, so they help you evolve while you're also doing the work of helping someone else in their connection.
Yeah, but I see those things separately personally. I see like your spiritual practice at home, your home base, your connection with deity is one thing. And then I feel like what you share outward, the connections that you make, and even being the divining rod for other people, that's another side of spirituality. I feel like deity kind of helps you with both, but I feel like you can't have one without the other, but they're not the same when it comes to spirituality. Like the way you approach your own personal practice and the way that you open it up to the community is very different. Like there's a lot of things that I won't share outward. Like we don't even talk about it in public. But there's lots of things that I practice when the door is closed.
And it's kind of the marriage of those two, because your own personal practices, you could be a devotee of a deity, and that's your own personal devotion. Yeah. It's very much about you and deity. When you're in a priesthood role, then it's you and the community or whoever you're in service to. So I think they kind of go together. You have to have your own personal connection, and that own personal connection needs to be really strong in what you do between you and deity, for you to be able to be that bridge, to be that conduit for other people. Because if your relation to deity is shit, you're not going to be able to foster any kind of experience for someone else. And honestly, the deity is probably going to be mad at you that, you're only talking to them when you're doing this ritual or whatever it is. You have to be on good terms with that deity before you do anything for somebody else. And that's probably the most hardest part, because it's very easy to get lost in service to other people. if you're running events or you're running a coven, you're running a group, not a lot of people step up to those leadership roles. And a lot of times we burn out the people who are in those roles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen it happen firsthand, which is why myself personally, I'm reluctant to share a lot of things and to put myself into that community role fully. Like, I feel like I kind of want to be the hag at the end of the forest that you come when you need help, when nothing else is working, That's my comfort zone. Maybe one day I'll be fully out there, planning community, stuff like you, but.
And then you go back to, the hut at the end of the wood.
Yep, go back to being in my hag shack.
I kind of do that after events, though. Maybe it's just an introvert thing. Like after I am doing so much, for other people and for something that's very public, then I have to kind of hide in my cave and like have a few days off where I don't talk to anyone. So
I hear
you have to recharge.
It's hard because like you give yourself to the community at a certain point and you're not able to get that piece back after you give it. It's out there. It's part of the world now, and that's why it's hard for me when I see people go from Dedicant to priest and skip the devotional part, because it's like the devotional part is the most important part of the whole experience. Like that is your spiritual journey. That's where you do your shadow work, your repair work, your ancestral healing. That's where you get all of the real mastering part of the craft and of spirituality as a whole. You get it when you're crafting, your path and your destiny here, and you're plugging away at it. I feel like when you start to open the door and let other people involved, it can kind of throw you off track if you're not solidly in your devotional space.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And, sometimes you'll just stop doing your own work. And if you're not evolving in your spirituality, your personal spirituality, you're not going to be of use to anyone else. And then there's the whole thing of going down ego trips and things like that, which I think we've all experienced at some point in our witch career.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell people, you need to know what you don't vibrate with just as much as you need to know what you do, because there are so many people, especially nowadays, that are out there on their soapbox spreading their message, and they're not realizing that there might be holes in their message, or their message might not be the right time to share it, or it might not be ready yet. And they just kind of jump in that seat and keep going. And, it's kind of hard to, steer that ship when somebody's so gung-ho to go in a particular direction.
Right. Absolutely.
Before we let you go, just let us know what's going on in your world, Stephanie. What do you have going on? Anything, any classes, any other things you're promoting? I know you mentioned before this interview that you just put out another book. That's ambitious. So tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Well, one of my most recent books is Dedicant, Devotee, Priest, which we've been talking about, but I also have just put out Prayers to the Morgan, which is a fully illustrated book on prayers to different aspects of the Morgan and all her different faces and guises, as well as some personal stories about her too. And I wrote that with my good friend Karen Storminger, who's the co-author. So you can find that on my website, stephaniewoodfield.com. You can find both of the new books. And you can also find the events that I'm going to be at. It's going to be a very busy summer. I just got back from an event in South Carolina, but the upcoming events, the first week of June is the Morgan's Call Retreat, which you can find on my website. And that's the first week of June, which is a 4-day event in Orange, Connecticut, that is all about connecting to the Morgan. And we have workshops, rituals, and a lot of community events, or as part of the event. And after that, I will be at Mystic South in July, which is in Georgia. And after that, I'm probably going to take a little bit of a vacation because I've been traveling a lot.
You sound busy.
Right?
That's exciting. That all sounds like fun activities. I wish you good luck with it and hope you have fun. Can you give us your social media links so that we can stay in touch with you?
You can find them all at stephaniewoodfield.com. I am also on Facebook under Stephanie Woodfield. You can find my author page or my private page I do have as well on there. And both are going to have links to everything that I'm doing. And you're going to see all the events that I'm at. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of pictures of people painted with war paint for the Morgan's Call retreat. Okay. And I also do make jewelry, which is under Etsy, The Forge of Athena. So you'll see a lot of the stuff that I make as well on my pages.
Very nice. Everybody go check her out. And this is her new book, Dedicant, Devotee, Priest, A Pagan Guide to Divine Relationships. And my name is Athena Silver, I'm your host. I'm a professional psychic medium and a seer. My website is readingswithathenasilver.com. My Instagram is athena.silver. My TikTok is at Athena_silver. And I'm also on Facebook at Readings with Athena Silver. Everybody check out Stephanie's new book and also her brand new book with prayers. And we will be back, not next weekend, but the weekend after that for another episode of Rebel Crow. If you want to reach out to us, feel free to hit us up at rebelcrowpsychicshow.com. You can watch new episodes free there and also on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So we hope you guys have a great day and enjoy. Much love.